Okay, I want to talk about the grid slave mentality and how you can break away from it. Now, I'm not going to tell you here how to get off grid because I've made heaps of videos on that already. But there's something that people have, and often it's they want something, but their mind, their mindset, their mentality, their way of thinking isn't geared to it. And I have seen this in people who want to go off grid who are currently on grids. And as I say a lot of the time, it's a great way to save money when you're off grid. But there's some people who they've been stuck in the paradigm of grid slave mentality for so long that they don't realise they're continuing to run with that mentality. And so I'm going to explain a bit of that. Now, I remember one comment to one person. It wasn't Troy, it was to somebody else, and everybody will remain nameless here. But somebody was worried about the heating for the winter, and somebody said, well, what do you plan to do? Do you plan to go and get a wood pellet stove and use that? In other words, go and buy wood pellets from some sawmill or wherever the hell you get that stuff from, hardware store, whatever, and burn a wood pellet stove to keep themselves warm. And they're talking about a joint here that's surrounded by trees. What? You for real here? When you're off grid, and especially when you're off grid and surrounded by trees, you don't go and buy a wood pellet stove to muck around and light up this wood pellet stove. If you can, go and get your own wood. See, part of this off-grid thing is about sort of breaking the dependency on the system, but not so much about breaking your dependency on it, but about being able to do it yourself to save $1 when you can, so long as it isn't super duper inconvenient. And the reality of the situation is it is very convenient to be able to cut your own wood and provide heat for yourself without having to run to a shop and buy something off them. Because, you know, it's like some of these other people I've seen who, you know, go away and there's some who they'll just run a generator, and I mean they'll run a generator 24 hours a day, you know, and it's like, oh, I'm off grid. Well, yeah, they're off grid, but you're dying here. The cost of diesel is killing you, and so you're not saving any money. And the whole point about saving money off grid is the fact that there's so much you can do off your own bat, yourself. And, you know, avoid buying something which has got some big corporate fat cat making dough out of it, then the shop making a profit on it, then government taxes on top of that, then you've got to drive into town and spend money on fuel to get this stuff, which has most likely been transported from another area via semi-truck, which is also cost money. And, you know, besides all the blooming corporate profit and the taxes and all the other crap, there's a lot of flaming money that's just not actually going directly to the product that you're getting. And so that in itself, you know, wipes you out cost-wise. And, you know, this sort of mentality of, like, eternal camping without any sort of an idea of how we can do it ourselves to save money, that is the grid slave mentality. The grid slave mentality is where you go set up somewhere, but you can't do anything until you buy this from a corporation, buy that from a corporation, buy that from a hardware chain, buy this from a flame and fuel supplier, buy, and that's the thing. And then you're no better than you were when you're in the city anyway, because you're not saving a cracker more. And you're still in this sort of a slave mentality of just being dependent on what you can buy from large corporations or other people who are selling this stuff. Now, if I go down to a service station here, I'll literally get about 3 or 4 little logs. It'll cost me $20. But for me to have a wood heater and then do something that stupid, that's also grid slave mentality. And going and buying, these eco logs that are sawdust and a bit of wax or oil or whatever compressed together that you buy from the hardware store. It's still stuck in the mentality of we have to buy anything to do anything. We can't do anything for ourselves. And that's your grid slave mentality. Another one I see, which I used to see with people I'd talk to at work, and that is they've got to convert everything back into a monetary paradigm. It's all about blimmin', how much I can sell something for or how much I can buy something else for. It's never a case of, can I use this thing here to improvise? And when I was first here, I worked that out with the old vehicles. And what I wanted to do was get those old vehicles and take them to scrap metal. And then go and spend money to buy roof sheets to build a small shed for wood. And I thought, hang on a minute, you idiot. Here you are with something with one of the most conveniently open and closed doors around the place. Just click, bang. On top of that, the door is completely water sealed. On top of that, there's glass on it. So if you put wood in there in the summer and it's still a little bit damp, well, it gets so hot in there it'll dry it out. And it's all out of the weather. Plus the damn thing's got half the wheels missing from it. It's out the front of your house anyway, so you don't have far to walk. And then I realised all I had to do was stick bits of plywood in so that when I opened the door it wouldn't just come spilling out. So the plywood was basically jammed in near the side section where your feet is, plus against the central pillars, in between the central pillar and the seat, and then it had a little notch going down right beside where your pedals are and all that. And that was up to the level of the glass. And just using a bit of existing plywood and that car, I didn't get rid of one thing and make a little bit of money and then try and have to get more money to get something which would do the same result, because I could improvise. The other idea is that there's no such thing as barter ever. I mean, locally here, we have people that grow onions, but also further up the road, we have people that grow potatoes on commercial scale. Also further up the road in another direction, we've got people who grow lettuces, rocket, a whole host of things. I think they might even grow apples and the whole shebang up there. But they grow a lot of stuff. And broccoli too in a big way, because we used to sell that to them when we were at the Boomerang Nurseries. But, you got to think not so much of I've got to get my stuff, I've got to go to the market, I've got to pay money to have a store, I've got to sell this stuff, and then I've got to pay tax on it and all of that, and then go to somebody else for that money, and then buy it off them, and they've got to pay tax, and the whole shebang, because we've got, GST on products that are sold here, and all that, whereas you could have just thrown the bloody money equation out the window, gone up to this person and said, look, I have heaps of firewood and I want some potatoes, how about we do a swap? And they may want what you say is a lot of firewood and whatnot. But if you've got a lot of firewood, you won't value that firewood as much as somebody who doesn't have much of it. And when they've got literally 100 tons of potatoes, they ain't going to value 0.1 of a ton of potatoes very much, because they've got so many of them. It's only 0.1% of what they've got. So because they're so flooded in potatoes, their value in their mind of potatoes drops. Plus on top of that, they're getting screwed by the supermarket and paid nothing for it. And then they're paying tax on top of that. And your value of firewood, because you're sitting there with half a yard full of it and you're tripping over it everywhere you turn, you mightn't have as much of a value on it. And therefore, at the end of the day, because you've got heaps of it and they've got none of it, and they've got heaps of what you want and you've got none of it, your values are a little bit different. So you may end up finding you get a very good deal, what you perceive to be a very good deal, without going through all the rigours of having to sell it to a third party and then turn up with money and buy it off someone. You know, this money mentality also, you know, can be unnecessary, and basically you're paying taxes and going to a lot of effort to sell your goods to a third party to then turn around and buy your stuff off somebody else who grows potatoes themselves or whatever. But this, you know, I can't live without having to buy something from the shops mentality. That is the grid slave mentality. You know, and off-grid living isn't an extended camping trip with high-priced camping equipment. It is long-term. It is setting up things so that you make the most of being able to do things on the cheap, where it ain't too inconvenient, and where it is not convenient to light a wood stove every day, in my case, then I go and get propane for that, you know, and for my hot water system. But for heating, you know, I've got 10 minutes to spend lighting up a fire, and you know, which doesn't even take that really. It only takes about 3 or 4 minutes. But you know, you've got to think about all that sort of stuff and just break away from this. Everything's got to be in money. Everything you deal with has to at some point be converted back to money before you can buy something. And this whole idea of always buying everything to do anything, you've got to break that mentality, and then you're ready to really think off-grid style, homesteader style, self-sufficient style.